The accusation echoed through the crystalline halls of the Emberdawn Court like a death sentence. "Thief! She stole from the High Lady's personal chambers!" Grace's knees struck the polished marble floor as two court guards forced her down before the assembled nobility. Her plain servant's dress pooled around her like a mockery of the silken gowns that surrounded her on every side. 500 pairs of eyes bore into her with disgust, fascination, contempt. The weight of their stares pressed against the glamour she'd held in place for 7 years, threatening to crack the magical facade that made her appear as nothing more than a common lesser fae. She kept her gaze lowered, her breathing controlled. If they discovered what she truly was, death would be a mercy compared to what the High Court would do to her. Lady Isolde descended from her position among the nobles, her court gown shimmering with threads of pure dawn light. The High Lady's blonde hair cascaded down her back in perfect waves, and her amber eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction as she approached Grace's kneeling form. "This creature was found in my private chambers at midnight," Isolde announced, her voice carrying through the throne room with practiced projection. "She was clutching this." The High Lady held up a delicate crystal vial filled with liquid starlight, a rare enhancement potion worth more than Grace could earn in 10 lifetimes of servitude. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't been anywhere near the High Lady's chambers. This was a setup. But who would believe the word of a servant against a High Lady of the Emberdawn Court? "What do you have to say for yourself, servant?" Grace lifted her eyes just enough to meet Isolde's gaze. "I did not take that vial, my lady. I was in the servants' quarters all evening. The head housekeeper can confirm." "Silence!" Isolde's hand connected with Grace's cheek, snapping her head to the side. The coppery taste of blood filled her mouth, and for one terrible moment, Grace felt her glamour flicker. She clamped down on her power immediately, forcing it back into the hidden depths where she'd kept it locked away for 7 years. No one could know. If they discovered she carried the bloodline of the Void Weavers, the ancient line that had been hunted to extinction 3 centuries ago, they would execute her in the court square as a warning to any other hidden bloodlines that might threaten the established order. A ripple of energy swept through the throne room. The massive doors at the far end swung open without anyone touching them, and every fae in attendance immediately dropped into a deep bow. Grace felt the power before she saw its source, a presence so ancient and commanding that it made her bones ache with recognition. The High King of the Emberdawn Court had arrived. Alexander Thornheart strode into the throne room with the lethal grace of a predator who'd lived for over a millennium. His dark hair fell to his shoulders, and his eyes, silver like starlight filtered through smoke, swept across the assembled court with an intensity that made lesser fae avert their gazes. He wore ceremonial armor etched with runes that pulsed with power, and a crown of twisted blackthorn branches rested on his brow, each thorn tipped with a shard of captured moonlight. Grace had only seen the High King from a distance in the 7 years she'd served in his court. He spent most of his time in the war rooms, or traveling between the realm borders, leaving the day-to-day court matters to his council of advisors. His presence here, now, during what should have been a minor disciplinary matter, sent a spike of fear through her chest. She felt his attention fix on her like a physical touch. Alexander's gaze locked onto Grace's kneeling form, and something shifted in the air between them. His silver eyes widened fractionally, and she watched his nostrils flare as though he'd caught a scent that didn't belong. The glamour she'd woven around herself 7 years ago had been created by a powerful enchantress. It should have been undetectable, even to someone of the High King's considerable power. But the way he was looking at her now, with a mixture of confusion and recognition that bordered on hunger, made her wonder if her worst fear was about to come true. What is happening here? Alexander's voice resonated through the throne room with the weight of absolute authority. He didn't take his eyes off Grace, even as he addressed the court. Lady Isolde's bow deepened. Your Majesty, we've apprehended a thief. This servant was caught stealing from my personal chambers. I request permission to have her banished to the mortal realm as punishment. Banishment to the mortal realm was essentially a death sentence for any fae. Without access to the magic that sustained them, even lesser fae would wither and die within a year. For a void weaver like Grace, whose power needed the concentrated magic of the fae realms to remain dormant, it would mean an even more painful end, as her suppressed abilities tore her apart from the inside. And what proof do you have that this servant is responsible for the theft? Isolde's perfect features arranged themselves into an expression of wounded innocence. She was found in my chambers, Your Majesty, holding the stolen vial. That's not what I asked. Alexander descended the 3 steps that led to the throne platform, moving with deliberate slowness toward where Grace knelt. I asked what proof you have that she committed the theft. Being present in a room is not the same as being guilty of a crime. The High King stopped 3 feet from Grace, and she felt the full weight of his power wash over her. Her glamour held, but only barely. Sweat beaded at her temples from the effort of maintaining the illusion while being this close to someone whose magic was actively testing the boundaries of her defenses. Look at me. It wasn't a request. Grace lifted her head, forcing herself to meet those silver eyes even though every instinct screamed at her to run. Up close, Alexander's face was even more devastating than she'd realized. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that would have been cruel if not for the slight curve at the corners that suggested he knew how to smile. But it was his eyes that captured her, held her, saw through her in ways that made her heart race with terror and something else she couldn't name. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The entire court seemed to hold its breath. Then, Alexander's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing with an intensity that made Grace's skin prickle with awareness. She felt something brush against her glamour, not aggressively, but with a curious, searching quality that suggested he sensed something off about her, but couldn't quite identify what it was. What is your name, servant? Grace, Your Majesty. Grace. He said it like he was tasting the syllables, testing them against some internal measure. Did you steal from Lady Isolde's chambers? No, Your Majesty, I did not. Grace watched something flash across Alexander's face. Belief, perhaps, or recognition. He turned to address Isolde without breaking eye contact with Grace, which was both unnerving and strangely intimate. Your evidence is circumstantial at best. Unless you can provide witnesses who saw this servant actually taking the vial, I'm inclined to dismiss these charges. Isolde's composure cracked just slightly. But Your Majesty! Furthermore, I find it curious that you would call for a full court assembly over a single stolen vial. Alexander finally looked away from Grace to fix the High Lady with a stare that made her flinch. Unless there's something else you're hoping to accomplish here. The silence that followed was razor sharp. Grace could see the calculation behind Isolde's eyes, the way she weighed her options before deciding on her next move. The High Lady had been planning something, but Alexander's unexpected defense had disrupted whatever scheme she'd been weaving. Of course not, Your Majesty. I merely wish to maintain order in your household. Isolde dipped into another bow, though Grace could see the rage simmering beneath her perfect facade. If you believe the servant is innocent, I defer to your judgment. Then this matter is concluded. Grace, you may return to your duties. Grace rose on shaking legs, acutely aware that she'd just made a powerful enemy in Lady Isolde. But more concerning was the way Alexander continued to watch her, his silver eyes tracking her movement as she backed away from the throne platform. She could feel his attention like a physical weight, could sense him trying to understand what it was about her that had captured his focus so completely. She needed to get out of this throne room before her glamour failed entirely. But as she turned to leave, Alexander's voice stopped her. Grace, report to my private study at sunset. I wish to discuss your position in my household. Her blood turned to ice. A private meeting with the High King was the last thing she needed, especially when he was already suspicious of something about her. But refusing a direct order from Alexander would draw even more attention. Yes, Your Majesty. Grace fled the throne room as quickly as dignity allowed, feeling those silver eyes burning into her back the entire way. The servants' quarters were located in the eastern wing of the palace, far from the crystalline splendor of the main court. Grace shared a small room with 3 other lesser Fae servants, but thankfully the space was empty when she arrived. Her hands shook as she locked the door and sank onto her narrow bed, finally allowing the glamour to drop. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Maintaining the illusion for extended periods drained her more than any amount of physical labor, and being in such close proximity to the High King's power had pushed her to her limits. She flexed her fingers, watching as faint traces of void magic danced across her skin like shadows given form. This was what she really was, a void weaver, one of the last of her kind, if not the very last. Her magic could unmake reality itself, could tear holes in the fabric between realms, could unravel the spells and enchantments that other Fae spent lifetimes perfecting. It was a power that had made her ancestors both feared and hunted, until the combined might of all the high courts had decided that void weavers were too dangerous to exist. Her grandmother had hidden her when the purges came, had used the last of her strength to create the glamour that masked Grace's true nature, and made her appear as nothing more than a lesser Fae with barely a spark of magic. Then she'd sent Grace into service at the Emberdawn Court, where she'd spent 7 years scrubbing floors and changing linens and keeping her head down. 7 years of safety, of invisibility, all threatened by one silver-eyed High King who'd looked at her like he could see straight through to her soul. A knock at the door made Grace jolt. She quickly pulled the glamour back into place, wincing at the effort it required so soon after dropping it. Grace, are you in there? She recognized the voice. Mira, one of the kitchen servants who'd become something close to a friend over the years. Grace opened the door to find the young Fae standing in the hallway with an expression of concern. I heard what happened in the throne room. Are you all right? I can't believe Lady Isolde accused you of theft. Everyone knows you'd never. I'm fine, Mira. The High King dismissed the charges. Mira's eyes widened. The High King defended you? In front of the entire court? She grabbed Grace's hands, her excitement palpable. Grace, do you know what this means? The High King never involves himself in servant matters. He barely even acknowledges the existence of anyone below the rank of court advisor. But he defended you! Grace gently extracted her hands from Mira's grip. It doesn't mean anything. He was simply ensuring justice was served. Justice? Grace, he couldn't take his eyes off you. I was there. I saw the way he looked at you. Like... Mira paused, searching for the right words. Like you were the only person in the entire throne room. A flutter of something dangerous stirred in Grace's chest, something she immediately crushed down. She couldn't. afford to feel anything for the High King. Couldn't afford to let herself believe that the way he'd looked at her meant anything other than suspicion about what she might be hiding. I have to meet with him at sunset. He said he wants to discuss my position in the household. Mira's expression shifted from excitement to concern. A private meeting? Grace, what if... She lowered her voice. What if Lady Isolde convinces him that you really are guilty? What if this is a trap? It was a fair concern. Grace had been asking herself the same question since leaving the throne room. But there was nothing she could do except show up and hope that her glamour held long enough to satisfy whatever curiosity had driven Alexander to summon her. I don't have a choice. If I don't go, it will look like I'm guilty. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that gave the Emberdawn Court its name. Grace had perhaps 2 hours to prepare herself for a meeting that could end with her exposure and execution. She spent that time reinforcing her glamour, layering additional wards and illusions until she was confident that even extended scrutiny wouldn't reveal her true nature. The effort left her exhausted, but it was necessary. She changed into the cleanest of her servants' dresses, still plain and simple, but at least without any visible stains or tears, and braided her dark hair away from her face. When she looked in the small mirror above the wash basin, she saw exactly what she wanted everyone else to see. A young, lesser fae with unremarkable features and barely a whisper of magic. Nothing special, nothing threatening, nothing worth a second glance. If only Alexander hadn't given her so many second glances already. The walk to the High King's private study took her through parts of the palace she'd only ever cleaned, never visited as a guest. The corridors grew wider and more ornate the four. Closer she got to the royal wing, the walls lined with tapestries that depicted the history of the Emberdawn Court in threads of light and shadow. Guards stood at attention at regular intervals, their eyes passing over her without interest. Just another servant on an errand. The study doors were made of ancient oak, carved with protective runes that hummed with residual power. Grace raised her hand to knock, but the doors swung open before her knuckles could connect with the wood. "Come in, Grace." Alexander's voice came from somewhere inside the study, and Grace stepped through the doorway with her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. The study was smaller than she'd expected, though still easily 3 times the size of the room she shared with the other servants. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated one wall, offering a view of the gardens below where twilight was settling like a soft blanket. The other walls were lined with books, ancient tomes, bound in leather, and newer volumes that still smelled of ink and parchment. A massive desk occupied the center of the room, its surface covered with maps and correspondence and what looked like military reports. Alexander stood by the windows with his back to her, his armor exchanged for simpler attire, dark trousers and a shirt that did nothing to hide the powerful lines of his body. Without the ceremonial trappings of kingship, he looked almost approachable, almost human, though Grace knew there was nothing remotely mortal about the male who ruled the Emberdawn Court. The doors closed behind her with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet space. "Thank you for coming." Alexander turned to face her, and the intensity in his silver eyes made her breath catch. "I imagine you're wondering why I summoned you." "You said you wished to discuss my position in your household, Your Majesty." "That was the excuse I gave in front of the court." He moved away from the window, closing the distance between them with slow, measured steps. "The truth is far more complicated." Grace forced herself to remain still as he approached, even though every instinct screamed at her to back away from the predatory focus in his gaze. There's something about you that I can't quite place. Something that calls to me in a way that nothing has in over 1,000 years. He stopped just outside her personal space, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his eyes, could smell the scent of night-blooming jasmine and old magic that clung to him. I've been trying to understand it since the moment I walked into that throne room and felt your presence. Panic clawed at Grace's throat. He'd felt her through the glamour. Somehow, despite all her precautions and protections, Alexander had sensed something about her true nature. I don't understand what you mean, Your Majesty. I'm just a servant. No, you're not. Alexander reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his fingers against her cheek where Isolde had struck her. The touch sent electricity racing through Grace's veins, and she watched in horror as her glamour flickered where his skin met hers. There. Did you feel that? Grace stumbled back, breaking the contact. Your Majesty, I'm not going to hurt you, Grace. But I need you to trust me enough to tell me the truth. His expression softened, though the intensity never left his eyes. You're hiding something powerful. And I think... He paused, as though the next words cost him something to admit. I think you might be my mate. The word hung in the air between them like a thunderclap. Fae bonds were rare and sacred, the connection between true mates something that happened perhaps once in 1,000 years. When a High King found his mate, it was an event that shaped the course of entire realms. The bond would manifest physically, glowing marks that appeared on both partners' skin, magic that intertwined and enhanced both individuals, an emotional connection so deep that they could feel each other's presence across vast distances. Grace had heard stories of fated bonds her entire life, had dreamed, in her darkest moments, of finding someone who would see her for what she truly was and love her anyway. But this was the High King of the Emberdawn Court, the same court that had led the purges against her people, the same court that would execute her the moment they learned she was a void weaver. There could be no bond between them, no future, no possibility of anything except death if she let herself believe in something so dangerous. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, but you're mistaken. I'm nobody. Nothing. Just a lesser fae who... Stop lying to me. The words cracked through the study like a whip, and Grace flinched. Alexander closed his eyes, clearly fighting for control, and when he opened them again, his expression was gentler. Please, Grace. I can feel the bond forming between us. I know you can feel it too. Whatever you're hiding, whatever you're afraid of, I can protect you. But I can't help you if you won't trust me. Trust him. Trust the High King whose ancestors had ordered the extermination of her entire bloodline. Trust the male who held the power to destroy her with a single word. But looking into those silver eyes, seeing the raw vulnerability there, Grace felt something inside her crack. If I tell you the truth, you'll kill me. Never. I would burn this entire realm to ash before I let anyone harm you. The certainty in his voice was absolute, and Grace realized with dawning shock that he meant every word. The mate bond might not be fully formed yet, but it was strong enough that Alexander's protective instincts had already locked onto her with terrifying intensity. She was poised on the edge of a decision that would change everything. Continue hiding and hope her glamour held, or take the most dangerous gamble of her life and trust that the bond between them was real enough to overcome centuries of prejudice and fear. Grace took a shaking breath and let the glamour drop. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her plain features shifted into sharper, more striking lines. Her eyes, which had appeared a muddy brown, now gleamed with flecks of silver that matched Alexander's own, and her skin, previously unremarkable, now seemed to shimmer with shadows that moved of their own accord, void magic dancing across her flesh like living darkness. Alexander's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the study. Void Weaver. The words were barely a whisper. He stared at her with an expression that was equal parts wonder and disbelief. But that's impossible. The Void Weavers were hunted to extinction by the combined forces of the High Courts? Yes, I'm aware. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, already regretting her decision to reveal the truth. My grandmother hid me when the purges came. She died protecting my secret. I've been hiding ever since. Alexander moved toward her, and Grace braced herself for the strike that would end her life. Instead, he dropped to one knee before her, his silver eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. You're magnificent. He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. The moment their skin touched, magic erupted between them, a burst of light and shadow that intertwined like lovers dancing. Grace gasped as she felt the bond snap into place with the force of a lightning strike. Glowing marks bloomed across her right arm, elegant swirls of silver and void black that wrapped around her skin like living art. Identical marks appeared on Alexander's left arm, and she watched as his eyes widened with the same overwhelming rush of sensation that was flooding through her. You're my mate, my queen, and I swear to you on everything I am that I will never let anyone harm you. The bond hummed between them, a connection so profound that Grace could feel Alexander's emotions as clearly as her own. His awe, his protectiveness, his absolute certainty that they belonged together. It was terrifying and exhilarating and more than she'd ever dared to hope for. Your court will never accept me. When they find out what I am, then they'll learn to accept it, or find themselves seeking service in another realm. Alexander rose to his feet, still holding her hand, his thumb tracing patterns over the glowing marks on her skin. You are my mate, Grace. That makes you the future queen of the Emberdawn Court. Anyone who threatens you threatens me, and I will show them exactly why I've ruled this realm for over a millennium. Before Grace could respond, a tremor ran through the palace. The magical wards that protected the royal wing shrieked a warning, and Alexander's expression shifted from tender to lethal in an instant. We're under attack. He pulled Grace behind him as the study doors exploded inward in a shower of splinters and dark magic. 3 figures in black robes materialized from the smoke, their faces hidden behind masks that pulsed with forbidden enchantments. Assassins. Stay behind me. Alexander's power erupted like a tidal wave, silver light cascading from his hands in deadly arcs that forced the assassins to scatter. But these were no common mercenaries. They moved with a precision that spoke of extensive training, and their magic had the distinctive taint of void energy woven through it. Someone had hired void weavers to attack the High King. But that was impossible. Grace was supposed to be the last one. One of the assassins lunged toward her, moving faster than should have been possible. Grace reacted on instinct, her own void magic rising to meet the threat. She twisted reality around her attacker, unraveling the enchantments on his weapons and turning his own shadow against him. The assassin screamed as his magic turned inward, consuming him from the inside out and dissolved into nothingness. The other 2 assassins froze, their attention shifting from Alexander to Grace with sudden, sharp focus. The lost heiress, one of them hissed, their voice layered with dark magic. We were told you were dead. Lost heiress? Grace had no idea what they were talking about, but she didn't have time to ask questions. The remaining assassins attacked in tandem, their void magic clashing against hers in a battle that threatened to tear holes in the fabric of reality itself. Alexander fought beside her, his power perfectly complementing hers in ways that should have taken decades to develop. The mate bond was already strengthening them both, their magic flowing together like two streams merging into a river. Where her void energy unmade and dissolved, his dawn magic rebuilt and reinforced. Together, they were devastating. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the last assassin fell, dissolving into shadows that fled back to whatever dark place had birthed them, Grace sagged against Alexander's chest. His arms came around her immediately, holding her steady as the adrenaline drained from her system. Are you hurt? No, but Alexander, they called me a lost heiress. What do they mean? His expression was grim. I don't know, but we're going to find out. He guided her to a chair, then moved to the remnants of one of the assassins. With careful precision, he collected a sample of the residual magic and held it up to the light. This void energy is different from yours, corrupted somehow, twisted by something unnatural. Grace's mind raced. If there are other void weavers alive, why haven't they revealed themselves? Why live in hiding for 3 centuries? Perhaps they weren't hiding. Perhaps they were building an army. Alexander's jaw tightened. This attack was too precise. They knew exactly when and where to strike. Someone told them I would be alone with you in my study. The implication hung heavy between them. Someone in the Emberdawn Court was working with the assassins. Someone who wanted both Grace and Alexander dead. Lady Isolde. She tried to have me banished this morning. When that didn't work, she sent assassins to finish the job. Alexander's power flared, the air around him crackling with barely contained rage. I'm going to have the truth from her tonight. Grace caught his arm before he could storm out of the study. Wait! If Isolde is working with corrupt void weavers, confronting her directly will only put us both at risk. She'll have backup plans, more assassins waiting. We need to be smarter than this. He looked down at her, and some of the rage in his expression softened. You've survived this long by being careful. I should listen to that wisdom. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers in a gesture of intimacy that sent warmth flooding through the bond. I'm not used to having someone to protect, to having someone who matters more than my own safety. Then we'll learn together, because you matter just as much to me. The moment stretched between them, fragile and perfect, before reality intruded once more. They had enemies to unmask, a conspiracy to unravel, and a court full of nobles who would riot when they discovered their high king had bonded with a void weaver. But as Grace looked into Alexander's silver eyes and felt the steady pulse of the bond between them, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done hiding. It was time to reclaim what had been stolen from her people. Time to discover what it meant to be the lost heiress the assassins had named her. And time to stand at Alexander's side not as a servant, but as his equal, his queen. The next morning, Alexander called a meeting of his high council, the 7 most powerful nobles in the Emberdawn Court who advised him on matters of realm security and governance. Grace stood at his side in the council chamber, no longer wearing servant's clothes, but dressed in a gown of midnight blue that Alexander had commissioned for her. The glowing bond marks on her arm were visible for all to see, and the shock on the council members' faces would have been comical if the situation weren't so deadly serious. Lady Isolde sat among the council, her perfect composure firmly in place, but Grace could see the calculation behind her eyes. The High Lady had not expected Grace to survive the night, and her presence here, bonded to the High King, had clearly disrupted whatever plans Isolde had been weaving. "I've called this council to address 2 matters of urgent importance," Alexander began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "First, I wish to announce that I have found my fated mate. Grace will be crowned as Queen of the Emberdawn Court within the fortnight." The council erupted into chaos. Voices overlapped in a cacophony of shock, outrage, and disbelief. "A servant? You've bonded with a servant? This is unprecedented. The High King cannot mate with someone of such low birth. The other courts will see this as a sign of weakness." Alexander let them shout for exactly 30 seconds before his power rolled through the chamber like thunder, silencing everyone instantly. "I am your High King. I do not require your approval for my choice of mate. The bond has been formed, witnessed by the magic itself. It is done." His silver eyes swept across the council, lingering on each face with pointed intensity. "Which brings me to the second matter. Last night, 3 void-corrupted assassins attacked us in my private study. They knew exactly where we would be and when, which means someone in this court is working with our enemies." Isolde's face remained perfectly neutral, but Grace felt a spike of something dark and malicious through her newly awakened senses. The High Lady was shielding her emotions carefully, but not carefully enough to hide them from someone whose void magic could sense the shadows in people's souls. "Your Majesty," Grace spoke for the first time, and every eye in the council chamber turned to her. "I believe I can identify the traitor." Alexander looked at her with surprise and trust in equal measure. "How?" "Void magic leaves a signature on anyone it touches. The assassins last night were corrupted, their power twisted by dark intent. But that corruption doesn't exist in isolation. It spreads through contact, leaving traces on anyone who's been working with them." She stepped forward, calling on the power she'd kept hidden for 7 years. Void magic swirled around her hands, shadows made visible, and she let it spread through the council chamber like a net cast into deep water. The magic passed over each council member in turn, searching for the telltale stain of corruption. When it touched Lady Isolde, the High Lady's carefully maintained composure shattered. Dark energy erupted from her in a wave of malicious power, and her beautiful features twisted into something ugly and hateful. "You think you've won?" Isolde's voice had lost all its practiced sweetness, replaced by venom that could strip paint. "You're nothing but a remnant of a dead bloodline. The Void Weavers were purged for good reason. You're abominations that threaten the natural order. Guards, seize her." But Isolde was already moving, her hands weaving a complex pattern in the air that opened a portal crackling with corrupt void energy. "You want to know why the assassins called you the lost heiress, little servant?" She laughed, the sound grating and cruel. "Because you are. Your grandmother wasn't just any void weaver. She was the last queen of the Shadow Realm, and that makes you the rightful heir to a throne that was stolen 3 centuries ago." Grace's world tilted on its axis. "That's impossible. The Shadow Realm fell during the purges. The Shadow Realm was betrayed, sold out by the very courts that now pretend to rule with honor." Isolde's eyes gleamed with madness. "And I've spent the last century gathering the scattered survivors, building an army of corrupted void weavers who remember what was stolen from us. We're going to tear down every high court, starting with this one. She dove through the portal before anyone could stop her, but not before throwing one last spell at Grace, a bolt of corrupted void energy aimed directly at her heart. Alexander moved faster than thought, throwing himself between Grace and the attack. The spell struck him square in the chest, and Grace screamed as she felt his pain explode through their bond like fire in her veins. "No!" She caught him as he fell, her hands frantically searching for the wound. The corrupted magic was spreading through his system like poison, dark veins crawling up his neck toward his heart. Through their bond, Grace could feel his life force flickering, growing weaker with each passing second. "Grace." His hand found hers, gripping weakly. "The Shadow Realm. You need to reclaim. Don't talk. Save your strength. I can fix this. I can." But she didn't know how. Corrupt void magic was beyond her experience, beyond anything she'd been taught by her grandmother. She was watching her mate die in her arms, and she was powerless to stop it. Unless... Grace remembered something her grandmother had told her once, in the days before she'd been sent to hide in the Emberdawn Court. Void weavers didn't just unmake reality, they could remake it too. They could reshape the fundamental fabric of existence, rewriting what was into what should be. It was dangerous magic, the kind that could consume the caster if they weren't careful. But Grace had spent 7 years being careful, being safe, being invisible. She was done being any of those things. Grace pressed her forehead against Alexander's, letting their bond open fully. She poured every ounce of her power into the connection between them, using the mate bond as a conduit to reach the corruption spreading through his body. Her void magic flowed into him, not to unmake, but to remake, finding every molecule of twisted energy and transforming it back into pure dawn magic. The effort was staggering. Grace felt her consciousness start to fracture under the strain, felt reality itself push back against what she was trying to do. But she held firm, anchored by the love she felt through the bond, by the desperate need to save the male who'd seen her true self and claimed her anyway. Light erupted from their joined forms, so bright that everyone in the council chamber had to shield their eyes. When it faded, Alexander gasped, his silver eyes flying open as clean magic flooded back into his system. "Grace." His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she sagged against him with relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What did you do?" "I rewrote the corruption, changed it back into what it should have been." She laughed shakily. "I didn't even know I could do that." "You saved my life." He pulled her into a kiss that sent magic sparking between them, their bond blazing with renewed strength. When they finally broke apart, his expression had shifted to something fierce and determined. "And now, we're going to save your realm." Grace blinked. "What?" Isolde was right about one thing. The Shadow Realm was betrayed. Your people were slaughtered not because they were dangerous, but because they held too much power. Power that the other high courts wanted for themselves. Alexander stood, pulling Grace up with him, and turned to address the stunned council. "I'm calling a conclave of all the high courts. We're going to expose the lies that led to the Voidweaver purges, and we're going to restore the Shadow Realm to its rightful place among the Fey kingdoms." "You can't be serious. The other courts will never agree to this." "They will, if they value their continued existence." Alexander's power filled the room, ancient and absolute. Grace is my mate and your future queen. An attack on her people is an attack on me. Any court that refuses to acknowledge this fact will find themselves at war with the Emberdawn Court. Am I clear? Silence. Then, slowly, the council members began to kneel, acknowledging not just Alexander's authority, but Grace's place at his side. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and political maneuvering. Alexander used every ounce of his considerable influence to force the other high courts to attend the conclave, while Grace worked with the court historians to uncover the truth about the Shadow Realm's fall. What they discovered made Grace's blood boil with rage. The Shadow Realm hadn't been destroyed because Void Weavers were dangerous. It had been destroyed because they'd discovered that the high courts were using forbidden magic to extend their own power. Magic that was slowly poisoning the Fey realms themselves. Her grandmother, the Shadow Queen, had planned to expose this truth at a realm-wide gathering. She'd been murdered before she could speak. The purges that followed had been designed to eliminate anyone who might have known the truth. Anyone who might have challenged the established order. And for 3 centuries, the lie had been maintained through fear and propaganda. Until now. The conclave was held in neutral territory, a crystalline amphitheater that existed between realms, accessible only through carefully controlled portals. Representatives from all 7 high courts assembled in the massive space, their combined power making the air thick with magic. Grace stood at Alexander's side on the central platform, wearing a gown of midnight and starlight that marked her as both Void Weaver and Queen. The bond marks on her arm glowed brilliantly, impossible to ignore or dismiss. I've called this conclave to address a crime that has haunted the Fey realms for 3 centuries, Alexander began, his voice carrying to every corner of the amphitheater. The genocide of the Void Weavers and the destruction of the Shadow Realm. Outrage erupted from several of the high courts, but Alexander silenced them with a look. We have evidence. Testimony from witnesses who were compelled to silence through blood oaths, historical records that were hidden but not destroyed, and the memories of those who survived the purges. He gestured to Grace. This is Grace, the last heir of the Shadow Realm and my fated mate. She deserves to know why her people were slaughtered, and you are going to tell her. What followed was hours of accusations, denials, and finally, when confronted with irrefutable evidence, reluctant admissions of guilt. The High Lord of the Dusk Court was the first to break, confessing that the forbidden magic had been his predecessor's idea. Others followed, each trying to shift blame while simultaneously attempting to justify their court's actions. Through it all, Grace remained silent, letting the weight of truth speak for itself. When the last confession had been wrung from the gathered courts, Alexander spoke again. The Shadow Realm will be restored. Grace will take her place as its rightful queen, and the Void Weavers who survive, corrupted or otherwise, will be offered the chance to return home. Any court that objects to this arrangement is free to challenge my decree, in single combat, against both of us. No one took the challenge. The restoration of the Shadow Realm took months, but with the combined resources of the Emberdawn Court and the reluctant cooperation of the other high courts, progress was swift. The realm itself had been sealed away rather than destroyed, a pocket of reality frozen in time, waiting for someone with enough power to unlock it. Grace stood at the threshold of her ancestral home, Alexander's hand warm in hers, and felt tears stream down her face as she looked upon the place her grandmother had died protecting. The Shadow Realm was beautiful in ways that took her breath away. Where the Emberdawn Court was all crystalline light and golden warmth, the Shadow Realm was silver moonlight and deep purple twilight. Ancient trees with bark like polished obsidian grew alongside flowers that glowed with bioluminescent magic. The palace that rose in the distance was carved from a single massive geode, its interior walls lined with crystals that reflected and amplified void magic. It's perfect. It's home. Alexander squeezed her hand. Are you ready? Grace took a deep breath and nodded. Together, they stepped across the threshold, and the Shadow Realm awakened around them. Magic poured through Grace like a river finally reaching the sea, her void power amplifying in ways she'd never experienced. She could feel every living thing in the realm, could sense the pulse of reality itself flowing through her veins. And she could feel her grandmother's presence, a whisper of memory woven into the very fabric of the realm. Thank you for keeping our home safe. Thank you for everything. Over the following year, the Shadow Realm slowly repopulated. Void weavers who'd been living in hiding emerged from the shadows, drawn by the call of their restored homeland. Some were corrupted, like Lady Isolde's forces had been, but Grace worked tirelessly to cleanse the twisted magic from their systems, remaking what had been broken into something whole and pure. Isolde herself was eventually captured trying to assassinate Grace during a diplomatic visit to the Night Court. She was given a choice: accept cleansing and redemption, or face permanent exile to the void between realms. In the end, she chose redemption, though Grace suspected it would take decades for the former High Lady to truly heal from the bitterness that had consumed her. The coronation was held under a full moon, with representatives from all 7 high courts in attendance. Grace wore a crown woven from shadow and starlight, and when Alexander placed it on her head, their bond blazed so brightly that it could be seen from 3 realms away. I present to you Grace Thornheart, Queen of the Shadow Realm, High Lady of the Void Weavers, and my fated mate for all eternity. The assembled crowd erupted in cheers, and Grace felt something inside her finally settle into place. She was no longer hiding, no longer afraid, no longer powerless. She was exactly where she was meant to be. That night, in the privacy of their shared chambers, split between the Emberdawn Court and the Shadow Realm, Alexander pulled Grace into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Do you have any regrets? He asked quietly, his fingers tracing the bond marks on her arm. About the life you could have had if you'd remained hidden? Grace thought about the question seriously. She thought about the fear she'd lived with for 7 years, the constant vigilance, the crushing loneliness of being the last of her kind. Not a single one. You saw me when I was invisible. You chose me when I was nothing. You fought for me when the entire world said I shouldn't exist. She pressed her hand over his heart, feeling it beat in perfect rhythm with her own. How could I possibly regret finding you? You were never nothing. You were always magnificent. The world just needed time to catch up. He kissed her again, and Grace felt their magic intertwine, dawn light and void shadow dancing together in perfect harmony, 2 halves of a whole, balanced and complete. Outside their window, the Shadow Realm sparkled with renewed life, and in the distance, she could hear the laughter of Void Weaver. Children playing under the stars. Her people were home, safe, free. And Grace had found something she'd never dared hope for. A love that crossed realms and defied centuries of hatred. A bond that had been written in the stars long before she was born. A fated mate who'd looked past the glamour and seen her soul. I love you, Alexandra Thornhart. And I love you, Grace Thornhart. My queen, my mate, my everything. Their magic flared one final time, sealing the vow between them with power that would echo through eternity. And in the silence that followed, wrapped in each other's arms, they both knew one unshakable truth. They had found exactly what they'd been searching for, across all the realms and all the ages. Each other. What do you think about the story? Let me know your comments. I would appreciate each of your thoughts. Also, comment which state you're watching from so I can give you a shout out on the next videos. Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay updated on our next uploads. Thanks for watching!